Welcome back, my Happy Crumpin' Wargamers, to another episode of Happy Crumpin' Wargaming. Today, we are going to discuss, is the meta finally balanced? And if it is, how can I prove it? And if it isn't, what do we need to do to fix it? Let's get right into the episode. All right, so first, before I show you all the stats and all of the evidence that we are actually, in fact, a very balanced meta right now, I want to look at some of the historical context of a balanced meta for Warhammer 40,000. Well, in all reality, this game has been plagued by unfair mechanisms from its inception because it is it's a constantly developing game. It just is what it is, right? Now, in my personal opinion, Warhammer 40,000 is the single best tactical game known to man. It is an exceptionally complex game, which I think is good, and I think we all believe it's good, because if we wanted a simple game, we would play one of the hundreds or thousands of other simplified miniature wargaming games. But Warhammer 40,000 is complex, but GW does seem to be getting better at not maybe simplifying, but streamlining rules a little bit. Now, historically, some of the issues that have plagued the game were codex creep, meaning the newest codex was always the strongest. And one of the really cool things that we've noticed about 10th edition is it really doesn't seem to be that big a deal. The Tyranids codex came out, and they had 3 real detachments that have actual valuable play to them, and 2 detachments that honestly look like they could if they just had a little bit something, and then 1 that's probably just fun. And that's a pretty great success rate for a codex. The Space Marines, honestly, exactly the same. Necrons, honestly, exactly the same. Now, yes, currently the Necrons are the best army in the game, but when we look at the stats in just a moment, one of the things that you are going to notice is that even though they are the best army in the game, they're not wildly the best army in the game, which is amazing. And in all reality, yes, they should be toned down just a wee bit, but also there will always be a best army in the game. So if the problem is that the best army in the game is just slightly better than everyone else, that's a pretty dang good thing for a balance. So one of the things that's been helping this a lot is GW has been instituting these balanced data slates, and they have become so much better. Oh my gosh, from the inception when they first were released in 9th to now, that team is doing a much better job at balancing the game, and I really, really appreciate all their work. Now, previously, the most balanced meta of all time that we have ever seen in Warhammer 40,000 was the tail end of Nephilim. And so what I've got the data for the stats of what the win rates and everything in competitive 40K were for you. This was Nephilim from 9th edition, and this was actually not too bad, right? So we had Gene Stealer Colts. They were the highest winning rate army. They were at that 61%. We had the Iron Hands. They were a little bit over 55%. We had World Eaters, which were right at 55, maybe 56%. Chaos Space Marines right at the 56%. Space Wolves right below. So we really only had 2 armies that were clearly over that 55%. Only 1 army over the 60%. And then as far as armies that weren't doing really well, your Death Guard was at 44. Your Tyranids 43. It was the Raven Guard and the Imperial Fist who are below the 40, which is really bad. So this is actually, honestly, when you look at all the state of all the other armies here, this is the most balanced the game has ever been. You only had 1 army that was blatantly over the line, 2 armies that were blatantly below the line, and then a few that should have gotten a little bit of an addressing. So this was Nephilim, the 9th edition. This was the most balanced the game had ever been previously until now. Check this out. This is our current win rate currently. So by the way, these graphs are actually from StatCheck. So StatCheck is a really, really awesome YouTube channel. I'm going to link their channel down below because I really respect the work that those guys do. I actually support them on Patreon. I think other people should as well, although I also think you should support me. A selfless plug. So here's the deal, everybody. This is the current win rates of the game. One thing I want to point out right off the bat, which is stunning, is there is no one over the 60% win rate, and there is no one below the 40% win rate. This game is shocking how balanced it is right now. GW has publicly stated that what they desperately want is to have everyone between the 45 and the 55% win rates area. And guys, that is a extremely challenging result to accomplish. And the fact that they are this close is amazing. So let's just take a look at a couple of these things. Custodians at a 57% win rate. Necrons at a 56% win rate. Everyone else is within that 45%, except for 3, maybe 4 outliers. We've got Adeptus Mechanicus at 43. We've got Space Marines at 42. World Eaters, and it's going to be Chaos Space Marines that are going to be roughly at that 44% win rate. So this is pretty shockingly amazing. It is the most balanced we've ever seen in competitive. Let's look at the least balanced in competitive, because a lot of people are going to be complaining. They'll be like, oh, all these things are really messed up. But let me remind you exactly how bad it was. This was the beginning of 10th. We had We had Death Guard that was below 30%. Votan that was 30%. We had Astra Militarum and Admech at like that 35%, 36%. We had Tau. We had Adeptus Sororitas at 40. This is actually really, really bad. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 that were below the 45% win rate level. And then we had Eldar at a shocking 71% win rate. And when we removed for the mirror match meaning who lost against the same army. So if we removed the mirror match for Eldari, they were closer to an 80% win rate. It was stupid. GSC and Imperial Knights were also stupid. This was real bad. So this is about as bad as it's ever been versus now, which is about easily the best that it has ever been. So let's talk a little bit about how do we make it even better. So what are the worst mechanisms in the game? These are the things that actually will just continuously make sure that people struggle with the game. And it's just, these things are just so hard to balance for GW. Honestly, it's a little bit of a struggle bus. So let's talk about it. Aircraft are currently not that big an issue, but historically they are an enormous issue. If you remember in 9th edition, these Tau Sunshark bombers, they were just absolutely a nightmare to play against. I think GW's actually done a pretty good job of basically making aircraft okay. Currently, where we are at in 10th edition, planes are still taken. Like you're seeing Storm Ravens, you're seeing double Storm Ravens, which is actually kind of an issue, but I don't want to talk about that right now. You are seeing interceptors, you're seeing actual planes that are able to be used in 10th edition right now. Before the Drukhari buffs, interestingly enough, their Void Raven Bomber was one of the best units in the game, even though their army was one of the worst units in the game, and that thing is still quite usable with a shocking amount of shots. This is another mechanism that GW has fixed that has historically been very challenging for them. Cover cannot improve people from a 3-up save to a 2-up save. Now, this is very confusing for a lot of people because you still get cover. It just effectively negates AP1, but you can't take yourself from a 3-up to a 2-up. If you're in a 2-up, you still get the benefit of cover, but you can't go to a 1-up because you always fail on a roll of 1. So if you remember from 9th edition, when we had the Days of Armor of Contempt, essentially you would have a Terminator who has a 2-up armor save in cover with Armor of Contempt. Basically what that would mean is that they would ignore AP2. So you need AP3 to get a Terminator saving on a 3-up, and that was absolutely a nightmare, and it was a really challenging thing to balance. You'd have the same thing with normal Marines. Normal Marines with a 3-up armor save would be standing in cover, taking them to a 2-up, and then they would have Armor of Contempt to ignore AP1, which means on AP1, they would still have a 2-up armor save. On AP2, they would still have a 3-up armor save. It was so abusive, and GW's really found a really good balance strike here to say that you just cannot improve your armor save from a 3-up to a 2-up via cover, and I think that's awesome. And then lastly, one of the biggest issues that GW always struggles with balancing, and they are still struggling with it today, is indirect. It's still an issue, but at least what they did is they made it very expensive. Now, I'm going to offer some thoughts on how do we make this stuff way, way better, and I really want to hear your thoughts in the comment section of what you would do, whether you agree with me or whether you would do things a little bit differently than I would do. So, how do we fix the meta from here? Even though we are in the most balanced meta of all time, we might still want to change it just a wee bit. Well, in all reality, Necrons are probably the best army in the game. I know the stat check is currently saying Custodians have a 1% win rate over them, but they also have many more hard counters than Necrons. So we'll talk about that right now. Necrons likely, I don't think they need many changes at all, to be honest with you. They already did the one big fix, which they need to, which is change the Devastating Wound strat in Canoptic Court. But now all they really need to do is put in a ruling saying that Satan cannot benefit from detachment rules. If you make it so that the Satan cannot use the Hypercrypt, the Hypercrypt ability to go back into reserve and come back in, Satan really are not that big an issue. Now, I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with potentially increasing the cost of Satan by maybe 10 points each, but people out there are suggesting that Satan need to be 300 points. You're just wrong. No. Those things move 6 inches. They are slow. They do not need to be 300 points each. They do, however, benefit a little bit too much from the detachments. So even just from a lore perspective, there really is no reason that the Satan should benefit from detachments anyway. So just put in a rule saying Satan cannot benefit from detachments, and I think Necrons are good to go. Then, let's see about Custodes. How do we handle Custodes problem? Well, here's the deal, guys. I'm a Custodes player. I'm currently playing Blood Angels because I think they're a lot better than Custodes, hilariously. But I am tempted to say that people just need to stop playing stupidly into Custodes. I know that sounds harsh, but here's the deal, everybody. If there is a brick wall in front of you, and the brick wall is saying, hey, I really want you to bash your head into me, you probably shouldn't do it. It's not a good idea. This is Custodes. If you have a problem playing against Custodes because you're like, well, I charged them and then I didn't kill them. Yeah, that's because you did a wrong thing. You shouldn't just charge blindly into the army that's saying, hey, please charge blindly into me. It's just not a good decision. You have to play Custodes a little bit differently. And if you are interested in how to play that, I'll make sure I link my video that I previously did on how to beat Custodes specifically. It's a great video that'll teach you how to handle that problem army. However, that being said, yes, I believe people just need to learn how to play the Custodes, but I would not have any issues with making Terminators 70 points again instead of that 65 because the Alaris Terminators are actually quite good. Besides that, it's going to be really hard to balance the army and keep them within that playable but not stupidly bad range until they get a new codex, just because of the nature of the elite army. They need a codex. But you know what? If you have to deal with Custodes at a 55% win rate, I think you're going to be pretty dang happy with the meta overall. Then the biggest deal possible for balancing this game and making sure that it stays balanced is indirect needs to disappear from the game. I understand GW, I understand that this is just a long thing, standing thing in the game that you love, but it just needs to disappear. It is so easy to abuse. I cannot how frustrated were you when you were reading the leaks for 10th edition and you were like, oh, okay, cool, there's no real indirect. And then Sisters came out and you saw that they would have ignore cover and they had heavy, so that they would be ignoring the indirect penalties altogether. And then we saw it with the Whirlwind. And then we saw it with the Devastator Marines. And then we saw it with all of Imperial Guard. So essentially what is happening in 10th edition right now is Games Workshop said, hey, we're going to put a penalty on indirect to make it fair and balanced. Everyone will get cover and will be -1 to hit if we use indirect. And then they gave all the indirect units in the entire game ways to get +1 to hit, +1 ballista skill, and ignore cover. So there is no penalty to indirect, and it is just a stupid, stupid decision. So, listen, if you want some indirect, Chaos Knights indirect is fine. Chaos Knights, they'll have a D6 blast, strength 5, AP 0, hitting on 3s or 4s. I can accept that as indirect that exists in the game. But look at Imperial Guard, for example, and I know everyone's saying Imperial Guard aren't a problem. You're wrong. Imperial Guard are a huge problem if you're playing someone who knows how to play Imperial Guard well. If you're playing someone who doesn't know how to play them well, then you're going to win anyway. But if people are prioritizing Imperial Guard correctly, let me explain what they will do to you. They will have 3 different mana cores, all hitting on 2s, strength 10, ignoring cover at AP 4, shooting indirect with 72 inches of range with flat damage 3. It's lethal and it's rerolls to hit. It's not fair. It's bullshit. It's not okay for the game. Games Workshop, here's the deal. If you want to keep indirect in the game, here's my suggestion. And by the way, I love the work you're doing, but you're just failing on this one part. Make a ruling for indirect that you cannot buff indirect. If you put in a simple rule saying indirect cannot be buffed in any way, great. I'm happy. Keep indirect, it's fine. Those same 180-point mana cores, if you put them at their AP 3, hitting on 4s instead of the hitting on 2s at AP 4, I can live with it. But every single time that you put indirect and you think you've got it balanced, you forget the fact that the rest of your army can then buff that indirect to ignore the penalties. So, get rid of indirect, or just put in a little clause saying that they cannot be buffed in any single way. Now, what are some buffs that we need to do to make sure that the meta continues to improve? Well, seriously, this is just an issue, and I understand why we're not doing it, because it's probably takes a lot of man hours, and it's probably is a lot of work. But Divergent Space Marines just need fully independent codexes. There's a big problem when you have, say, an army that is very powerful like the Black Templars, who also get to benefit from all of the things in Codex Space Marines, like, say, your 65-point scouts, etc., things like that. It is a huge issue. So what honestly needs to happen is that Black Templars need their codex, Blood Angels need their codex, Dark Angels need their codex, and they can't borrow from the normal Space Marines. So if we look at the current win rates right now, we have vanilla Space Marines at a 42% win rate. But then when we go to Black Templars, they're at the 44%. And it really just messes people up quite a bunch because Space Marines go all over the place. It makes it very hard to nerf Black Templars because then you're going to be nerfing vanilla Space Marines. It makes it very hard to buff vanilla Space Marines because then you're going to be buffing Dark Angels and Black Templars. So Divergent Space Marines just need fully independent codexes. AdMech's very close, guys. If you think AdMech is useless, you're wrong. You're just mistaken. AdMech, here's the deal. Let's try this. Give imperatives to affect allow imperatives to affect both ranged and melee weapons. I think if they did that, that might be just enough to push them over the edge. One thing that AdMech doesn't need is points buffs. They need a slightly different rule. Just maybe they need to hit slightly harder. But as is, they actually are quite usable, but they do need just a tiny little kiss. But they don't need even cheaper units. Then lastly, World Eaters. How can we make sure that World Eaters are still fun to play, but they are not super abusive? Well, in all reality, I would agree that we should reverse the points nerfs to the 8-bound. That was a little ridiculous. But I do think that they did a great job with nerfing the rules to Favorite of Khorne and the Berserker Glaive. That's what would allow people just to fish and always bring Angron back no matter what. Keep those new rules nerfs in place, but reverse the points nerfs. And I think you have a happy army that's going to be sitting perfectly at that 49 to 51% win rate, and everyone's going to be super happy. So let's just do some quick closing thoughts, and then I'm going to let you go for the day. Currently, every single army is playable. That is freaking amazing. Thank you, Games Workshop. You've done such a good job with balance. There is a little more work that needs to be done, but every army is playable. If you're one of the people who thinks every army is not playable, come into the Discord, chat with me, book a coaching session. I will show you how to make any army in the game competitive and playable. Now, for those of you who are saying, oh, Necrons are the best army in the game, it's not fair. There will always be a best army in the game, no matter what. Even if they get everything at 50% and one army is at 49, that means one army is going to be at a 51%. There will always be a best army in the game. We don't want perfect balance in this game. We want the fact that some armies have specific strength and some armies have specific weaknesses. This will always make for better/worse matchups. It is why we don't play chess. We play a much more interesting and a much more realistic tactical game. It is awesome. We like small unbalance. We don't like big imbalance. This will always allow for counterplays, and we are happy for it. Ladies and gentlemen, Grotzen Gets. This was my video on talking about the perfectly balanced meta. It's not perfect, but it is getting better every single day, and is the best time we've ever lived in when it comes to Warhammer 40,000. Every army can beat basically every army with a few matchup-dependent changes, but this is the best it's ever been. I hope you're enjoying it. Let's make it even better, and I will see you guys in hopefully the next TTS tournament that Happy Crumpin' Wargaming is hosting. If you're interested in that, go and sign up for the members only section of the Discord, and you can find that link in the description down below. I'm also linking StatCheck so that you guys can go look at their meta dashboard yourself. They have really these awesome graphs that really show you. They can filter between veteran players, new players, experienced players, etc. It'll show you all sorts of stuff. So this is not sponsored by them, by the way. I'm just giving them a shout out because I really like the work that they do. So until next time, crump on and enjoy your freaking life. I can't wait to see you legends next time. Bye-bye.